I remember during the time period when I was dealing with a lot of anxiety, I was on the train one day and I was listening to a podcast. And the podcast was with Jay Shetty and Deepak Chopra, and they're talking about journaling. I used to have this thought process like, oh, journaling? Yeah, if I just write down all my problems, then I'll just have no anxiety. I used to have this thought process for journaling reading, but they were talking about how beneficial it is for your mental health, so it convinced me to start journaling. And it really did help my mental health. Like, I'm not saying that this one thing is going to solve all your problems, but it will give you some additional clarity that will help you in making progress. I remember seeing one study that said we have 60,000 thoughts in our head on any given day. Bro, that is so much to manage that if you're able to journal and at least get some of your thoughts onto paper, then you'll have more mental clarity. If you can organize your thoughts, then you can better solve your problems. And if you can better solve your problems, then it'll improve your mental health. When you mention journaling and you're a guy, for some reason, some people have this mindset like, oh, what do you write in your diary? Sure, call it whatever you want. If it's good for your mental health, I'm going to do it. Okay, so the first prerequisite of journaling is to be honest. If you're lying to yourself while you're journaling, then what you're producing is actually going to make your situation worse. So the first prerequisite, be honest. I remember when I was dealing with anxiety, I was writing down things like, I fucking hate that I have to deal with these panic attacks. Like, why is this happening to me? Why do I feel so terrible? I know this is like a pretty intense thing to just bring up like this. But if you have these thoughts and your thoughts are swearing, you should write that down because then you're expressing it, you're letting it go. So even if your thoughts are like, man, this person is an asshole, blah, 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 still write that down. You're not actually saying this to that person. And it's way better to say it in your journal than it is to actually say it to that person. You may have to have a tough conversation with them just based on whatever you're journaling. Then when you have that tough conversation, you'll have more of a rational response than like an emotional response because you've already thought it through by writing about it. So first prerequisite of journaling, to be honest. Now we're going to go through the 3 journaling techniques that I recommend. The first one I learned from that podcast, actually, with Deepak Chopra and Jay Shetty. So I try to do this every morning, and I ask myself 4 questions. The questions are going to sound kind of stupid, but I promise you that they work for me and a bunch of other people. Who am I? Obviously, you know who you are, but for this, you could write your name or a short description of yourself, like really define yourself. I think it's good for us to define who we are and who we want to be, rather than letting the world define that for you. What do I want? So here you'll get some clarity on your goals. What do you want out of life? What do you want from the day? Having that clarity will give you some direction. What am I grateful for? All right, so this one's probably the most important one, honestly. Gratitude is so important for your mental health because we just have so many thoughts throughout the day, right? Think about how many of those are negative. And especially if you're dealing with anxiety or any other mental health issue, a lot of those thoughts will just automatically be negative. So we have to consciously have some positive thoughts to counteract that. Our brains are kind of wired to look for negative things. And the reason for that is because we know we die. So, we're constantly like, how do we avoid dying? How do we avoid everyone hating us? So write down 3 things you're grateful for and why. And you might be like, oh, I can't think of 3 things. Come on. Even if you're in like the toughest situation, there's probably 3 things you could think of. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying to ignore the negative things that are happening in your life. What I'm saying is we're also going to look at the positive things to the extent that we can. And the last question is, what is my purpose? So purpose is such an important part of our mental health. It's actually the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is self-actualization. In other words, finding your purpose. Just write down what you think your purpose is. Could be in life, could be for, the next month. Maybe it's just passing a test. Maybe that's your current purpose. But just write down your best guess of what your purpose is. And if you ask yourself these 4 questions day to day, you get better at answering them and you become more clear as to who you are, what you want, what you're grateful for, and what your purpose is. That's extremely valuable. And the second journaling technique that I do every night is I ask myself, how did I live up to my ideal? How did I not? I'm really big on this idea of creating an ideal version for yourself and then aiming towards it because then it gives you like a set target. You're like, okay, I want to be this type of person. And I'm not saying to like pick just one person and make them your God. I'm not saying that. I'm saying pick the qualities that you value from other people, like could be friends, celebrities, people online, could be anyone. And also pick the qualities you admire about yourself, put them together and like create this ideal version of yourself that you're aiming towards. So once you have this like ideal version of yourself, what I like to do is I like to keep myself accountable as to how I'm living up to it. I ask myself, how did I live up to my ideal? How did I not? And I'll be honest, the how did I not is usually longer than the how did I live up to my ideal. Because we're imperfect, we're human beings. Like it'll take a long time to hit that ideal version of ourselves. But the goal isn't to be perfect. The goal is to make progress. So don't beat yourself up if you're not living up to this ideal version that you've created. But it's still good to have that because now you know what to aim towards. Those are the 2 journaling techniques I try to do every day. And the third technique is specifically for people who have anxiety. It's from the book, The Worry Trick. This is a 10 out of 10 book for anxiety. If you have anxiety, read this book. This process is what I like to call letting it out. I don't remember if this is what it's called in the book, but that's what I call it. When I was dealing with panic attacks, one thought I kept having was, what if I have a heart attack? Because initially I didn't know that there were panic attacks, and then I had to just kind of work under the assumption, because at least to my knowledge, there's no real test for it. So even now, like, I don't know that there were panic attacks, but I'm assuming so, because once I got better, once I improved my mental health, then like 99% they went away. But pretty much the thought I was having, since I was feeling all these like really physical sensations, was, what if I have a heart attack? This thought just kept coming up, right? So what you do is you pick a time during the day and you write down in as much detail as possible that thought. So for me, I would write down things like, what if I have a heart attack? What if I die? What if I have a heart attack at work? Like, these are the thoughts that had a grip on me. So I wrote those thoughts down every single day at the same time. And what happened was, eventually, I didn't have an emotional reaction to them. I kind of got bored of the thought. You might be thinking, Prav, I don't want to write my most anxious thoughts down in detail. Like, that sounds like it's going to make my anxiety worse. I promise you, it helped me and a lot of other people because it's in this book. See, with these thoughts, the more you voluntarily face them, the less of an emotional reaction you have to them. So I'll give you an analogy. You probably drive a car, right? The first time you were driving, you probably were like, what if I crash? Like, what if someone else crashes into me? But the more you did it, the more you just got kind of bored of driving, and then it became second nature, right? The same way works for your thoughts. If you can just repetitively face them voluntarily, eventually you get bored of them. What do a lot of people tell you when you say you have anxious thoughts? They say, don't think about it, right? And that's never worked. It's like, okay, don't think of a lion. You immediately thought of a lion. We know that doesn't work. So maybe we do the opposite. Maybe we face it every day, but we do it voluntarily. It also helps you spend less time with those thoughts. So when I was having that thought, right, what if I have a heart attack? It was like repeatedly running in my head. But when I scheduled this let it out session, then I could tell myself, okay, I'll address this in tomorrow's let it out session. And then unconsciously, I was able to let it go. But telling yourself that, hey, I'm going to address this in tomorrow's let it out session, that only works if you actually do it. Because your mind knows. You can't lie to yourself. Like, if you're like, yeah, I'm going to address it in tomorrow's let it out session, and then you don't actually write down your anxious thoughts, your mind will be like, no, you're not. You're not going to do it. And it'll still bother you with those same thoughts. Again, I'm not a medical professional. This isn't medical advice. This is what I learned from this book, The Worry Trick, and it really helped me. So again, pick the same time every day, preferably like mid-afternoon. You don't want to do this first thing in the morning, late at night, because it could affect your sleep, or right after a meal. And so I was doing it at like 4:30 p.m. every day. If you're dealing with anxiety, schedule this in your calendar, because I'm telling you, it helped me a lot. I know I just gave you a lot of journaling techniques and I told you to try and do them every day, but the goal initially, if you're not doing this, is just to do it as much as you can. As many days as you can from now is progress. And remember, our goal is always progress, not perfection. So if you're doing it 0 days a month right now, if you do 5 days a month next month, that's progress. And then eventually you'll do 10 and eventually 15. One thing you can do is you could create a habit tracker. So I have one here. You write the day on the left-hand side, the month up top, and then the habit you want to implement. When you're first doing this, just write like the first journaling technique you want to implement. So if you have anxiety, the one you should focus on is letting it out. So just write, let it out. And then you could do a morning journal and then a night journal. And every day, if you do the habit, you cross it off. And if you don't do the habit, you don't cross it off. And remember, the goal is not perfection. The goal is progress. But we want to make sure that we're doing it consistently. So try to look at this frequently. And listen, I know that facing your anxious thoughts like this is not going to be easy. It was very difficult for me to do, but it was worth it. Life's not easy, but it's worth it. Take care.